The Metropolitan's hold on the new underground lines was vastly tightening, and the new underground system was growing. The Metropolitan wanted to build a full inner circuit, but realised the number of new projects was wearing the company thin. It was decided a new sub-company was formed to handle and oversee the building of this inner circuit. The Metropolitan District Railway was a small railway company in its own right, and it was expected that upon the railway's completion, the district company would merge back into the Metropolitan once again. For a while, the two companies got along harmoniously. A proposed new embankment along the Thames foreshore was causing the most excitement. It allowed for the first time the civil works to be connected to the network, and the Metropolitan District was to provide the railway route. The new railway would be covered with a relief road, taking much needed traffic off the congested smaller streets. Even though issues with finances caused some delays, the embankment and railway was completed 8 years after its conception. It was supposed to strengthen the two railways' cooperation. However, tensions began to show. The district was becoming increasingly frustrated with the operational services of the Metropolitan, and even though the two companies were technically separate, the district wanted true independence. Within 18 months, the Metropolitan was given notice of the district's intent, and the 4 directors who were equally displeased resigned. The Metropolitan were not too happy, but they were powerless to stop it. Ultimately free of the Metropolitan, the district built new repair works in their own sheds at West Brompton and began to start allocating new stock. Knowing of the feud from the Great Western, the district turned to Bayer Peacock once again. These engines were practically identical to the Metropolitan, but were repainted in the new district green. The portfolio soon increased to 54 engines within just a few short years. The district and the Metropolitan soon became bitter rivals, each fiercely attempting to outcompete the other. If one offered more frequent services, then the other was devising plans for new price incentives for their customers. While both companies were battling for profits and passengers, neither was keen to complete the inner circuit the district was originally asked to do. Money on both sides was tight. The cut and cover method was expensive, so both concentrated efforts on overground lines and extensions that stretched into the leafy suburbs. The district built its own link into Hammersmith, which offered a much more direct link into the heart of the city. If you ever venture into Hammersmith, it is amusing to see the Metropolitans and the district's underground stations mere yards from each other. So was the rivalry between the two. They couldn't bear to use each other's platforms. By 1884, the lines were finally drawn in the sand and the inner circuit was finally completed. The district lines were established. However, the rivalry boiled intensively, with the Metropolitan running one way and the district the other. The passengers suffered the most, with the return tickets not being transferable between the two rivals. The rivalry reached levels of ludicrousy and culminated in an incident near Kensington. There near the station was a siding that each railway advised it was there for their own exclusive use. Rather than settling the matter amicably or in a court of law, the district line took matters into their own hands and physically chained a train to the siding itself. The Metropolitan tried to haul the train away, but it was no good. It was unclear of how and when the dispute ended, but it was very clear the two chairmen of the respective companies clearly despised each other. Jane Starts-Forbes, the district's chairman, and Edward Watkin, the Metropolitan's counterpart, had completely different opinions on the wider scope of their businesses. The district line wanted to focus on improving the existing urban routes, while the Metropolitan, not satisfied to stay within the confines of the city boroughs, wanted to explore and expand the lines much further afield, even as far as Paris and beyond. The Metropolitan had devised a new tunnel across the English Channel. Little did they know that their dream would be realised 100 years later. Edward Watkin, who was also the chairman of the Manchester, Sheffield and Lincolnshire Railway, wanted both his companies to form a unified network. He was a man, by his own words, never satisfied without seeing our own railway become the grand terminus for a new railway system throughout England. Up until now, the cut and cover method was the preferred way to make new lines, but it was very damaging, time-consuming, and due to the compulsory purchases of the overhead buildings, along with the demolition work needed, was proving very costly. It was not very viable, especially within the heart of the city. There are only so many buildings the railways could buy, and there was not enough straight roads either railway could tear up, and the ground under the Londoners' feet was littered with gas, electricity, water and sewage mains. Even though both railways were profitable, the money they were both making would not cover these costs. The government were reluctant to allow the cut and cover method next to its more historic buildings, but encouraged both railways to figure out a solution. The breakthrough was in fact staring at them in the face, as early as 1818. A young inventor by the name of Mark Islamabad Brunel had patented a new type of tunnelling system that cut through London's ground and clay using protective shields. Brunel used this new method to dig a long tunnel under the River Thames. Brunel's shield was rectangular in shape and made of 12 independent iron frames. These frames were sunk to the bottom of a vertical shaft, which were inched forward as the miners worked within them, digging out the tunnel. Following the diggers would be an army of bricklayers ready to shore up the tunnel walls. The tunnel, which was once designed to be a major transport hub and tourist destination, had now become a hotspot for drunks and thieves. The East London Railway, one of the smaller private companies, bought the tunnel, but the Metropolitan seized its chance and bought the tunnel from them when the London line suffered financial difficulties. The link of the Thames Tunnel to the network was probably one of the most defining moments in the Underground's history. The tunnel connected the network to its first official tube. Working on Brunel's shield technique, Peter William Barlow developed a new type of shield excavation system, which was much simpler, and because the tunnel was smaller and circular, was a lot stronger and faster to build. The circular lining was strengthened with iron segments, just like Brunel's, but instead of using bricks, workers poured quick-setting lime grout between the new rings of steel and the soil. The ground solidified, providing a barrier between the men and the soil and prevented the soil from moving and settling, putting pressure on the iron. At first, this new railway could only provision for 12 people at a time. The carriage was driven by a stationary steam engine, but due to its gross inefficiency, the project closed after only 3 months of operation. The tunnel was converted into a pedestrian walkway, offering its patrons to use the tunnel for a halfpenny toll. Of course, the Metropolitan were not in the business of making walkways. They knew what these tunnels could bring, and now they knew the tunnel's secrets. There was no end to what they could do. But something on the new railway intrigued Watkins. Something he hadn't thought of doing. And coupled with the news of a young inventor from Brighton that had created a very unusual railway system, the Metropolitan wanted to experiment with this new type of power. But that's a story for another episode.